Hi friends, Tiffany here. Welcome to my quilting life. So today, everybody that's been asking, your answers are here. A lot of people ask me on the daily, actually, how do I organize my scraps? So let's go to the beginning. What are scraps? Scraps are pieces of fabric left over from making a project. Just like you have scraps left over from eating dinner and you scrape that plate off into the dog food bowl and they eat it up. This is the same thing. Scraps from our quilts need a place to go and they need to be cleaned up. So what do I do with my scraps? Well, I'm going to show you a few things and hope that this helps you answer the question of what I do with all of my scraps. So people ask me often about this whole scrap thing. Well, I could tell you right now, I do make a lot of my own scraps, but I get mail that has lots of scraps in it. So some people send me their scraps and they come in boxes and they are just scraps, just that. Scraps of all sorts of everything. Just all sorts of scraps, all sizes, all shapes, all different kinds of fabric. I do, however, make my own scraps. So under here, this whole thing, you can see, goes down, and then it goes down another bucket down here, and then there's another bucket on the bottom. My other bucket has overflown, so now it's sitting on top, and then there's more down there. My scraps usually, after a video, end up somewhere right here. And then I clean them up little by little. As you can tell, it's probably been about a year or maybe way more than a year since I've cleaned up my own personal scraps. There is also a different kind of scrap. These scraps right here. These are the non-usable scraps. These are the ones I can't cut down into anything and or I don't want to because who needs that piece? You know what I mean? So these are my I don't need it scrap buckets that I have. These are my use it. These are pretty big scraps usually in these ones. And then these are the ones that people send me. So in the midst of dealing with all of these scraps, because there's so many of them, I do use them. That's the thing, is using them. So how do I start organizing and then where does it go when it's organized? Well, I'm going to show you. So first off, I take a pile of scraps. Usually I empty a bag onto the table, and what I always do, the first thing is I separate all of the fabrics that are a selvage to selvage with the fabric cut. So I'm going to just peek here off the top. Here is what I'm saying about a selvage to selvage cut. Here is a selvage. There is a selvage. So technically, this is one whole piece of fabric cut into a strip, ready to use. So I pull all these out of the pile. So I will stand here and grab, here's another one. Here's one selvage to another. So here's another full piece. Now, every once in a while in scraps that people send me, this unit right here, this strip piece, would have been cut right here. So I usually open them to make sure that they are not cut. If they're cut, they stay in the pile and they go into a different pile. So there's that. And I just sit and dig through it. So here is another selvage to selvage piece. So again, separating it. And I just stand here or sit. Usually I sit in my chair at the desk for the first part. Here's another selvage to selvage, and if you don't know that it is, just look at the ends. If it usually has the fuzz and or these holes along this edge, and the writing, then you know that it's salvage to salvage. So I sit and pull all those out. So I'm just gonna skip ahead here, and we're going to show you what I do with those. First things first, as you can see, there's already stuff up here. I turn my iron on. With pulling out all of these salvage to salvage cuts, I make piles with them. So here is my pressed pile right here. So all of these I've lined up nicely and I've pressed them nicely. So all of these are in a pile. Then there's another pile of salvage to salvage, and that is pile number 2. These ones are salvage to salvage, but these are bigger chunks. So here's bigger chunks, and these have their own separate place in my room. So these I separate. If it's bigger than like 10 inches, I usually pull it out and fold it like this and put it away. So how do I do this? Well, first thing I do is I press everything. There's one thing with all of my scraps, I press it all because it does not fit where I want to put it if it's not neatly pressed and cleaned up. Okay, so now that all of these are neat, then I take my stack right here, and these 2 skinny ones are just going to go right here on top, and on the bottom I have the thicker ones. We're going to put those on the bottom, and then I'm just going to put the pile away. The next thing I pull out of the stack of scraps is anything that looks big enough to be a fat quarter. So here is a piece right here that I already did, but I have already pulled all the fat quarter amounts of fabric out. So what I usually do, here's a fat quarter, is I measure them first on my mat before they're pressed. I'll go, okay, this is 22 or 21. Some fabrics aren't as long. And this is 18 right here. So then I bring them over here and I press them, nice and pressed, fold it towards me, and this is in the lengthwise right here, and then I fold it again towards me, and then I press it one more time to kind of hold this down right here, give it a little bit of a crease. Then I'll lift it, and it folds itself in half because I lifted from the center, and then put my finger in half and fold it in half again. So there is one of my fat quarters. And in all of the scraps that I just got the other day, so far, this is how many fat quarters I've found so far. So these will be going into my fat quarter bin, which I will show you guys all of those bins, but let's just get on to organizing scraps still. Okay, the next thing I do is I go through the stack and I find large chunks. So here is some large chunks right here. So here's 2 large chunks. What I do, these are really simple, is they go by size. So the bigger the chunk, so these are pretty big, I just give them a good press, I fold them up, and then I stack them in one pile of the big chunk pile. All right, we're going to bring this over here so that you can see. The next thing I do is medium chunks. So here, right here is 2 medium chunks. They may not need to be pressed. They may need to be pressed. I always run the iron over them because I want them ready for the next step after I iron. So here is another salvage to salvage cut. Oh, and there's some little scraps mixed in. So I'm just going to take this little one right here. I press it, and this is going to go in my littler scrap pile. This is a salvage to salvage cut. So I'm just going to neatly press it. I always align the salvages nicely. And then if it's crooked at all, you'll know. And then it won't lay flat either. I just align them, give it a good press, fold it on top of itself. And I'm going to show you right here. I'm lining up the fold on the salvages. So you can see I actually had to shift it sideways so that it's nice and straight. That way there's no bow. If I cut 2.5-inch strips from it, it won't bow at the top corner. And this is not that big. So this isn't my 10 inches or bigger cut. So this one is just going to go on the bottom of this pile for now. And again, I'll show you where all these get situated in a few minutes. So here again, another salvage to salvage. This one has a cut out of the end right here. So I fold that towards the outside. So I'll line this up. I'll put that part on the bottom, line it all up, give it a good press. It's nice and flat, fold it on top of itself. And that way I can see that cut out of that one side, but I'm going to do the same thing and stack it under here. All right, so here we are. Say, look at, there's already some squares. I'm just going to press a couple, press a couple, press a couple, press a couple, and these are going to go in the little scrap pile right here. And there's an even littler scrap pile, so these could go in this little pile probably. Here's a small scrap. This is a big enough square to get 2.5 inches, so I'm going to put that in that pile. Here we have, oh, another salvage to salvage. Look at that. Getting lucky down in here. So I'm going to line it up nicely, press it. I always keep a pair of scissors here at the iron because I always have to chop away. Sometimes on the fabrics, there's like lots and lots of threads hanging off. I trim those off so that way they don't get tangled with other pieces. So this is just going to go in my salvage to salvage pile. Here's one right here, and here's one right here. These are strings because this is smaller than 3 inches, but it's 2.5. So I'm just going to give this a good press right here, and it's going to go in my string pile. So here's my string pile. All this is going to be turned into strings. And yes, I cut all of my strings into strings. Now, here's 2 differences right here. This is not going to go in strings. This piece is too small. This piece, on the other hand, is 10 inches or longer. I kind of go by 10 inches or bigger kind of piles. So this is a long one. This will go with my strings for my string bin. And then this one will be cut into 1.5 inch or 2 inch pieces, and I'll get squares out of this. So that goes in that pile. Again, this is long enough. It's obviously longer than 10 inches. I just give it a good press because my strings don't fit in the bin unless they are pressed. All right, here we go. Here's another one of those. So it's a really long piece. For now, I just keep them folded in half until I use them. Just like that, they're neatly pressed and they go in the string pile. All right, so I will continue to do this with all of these pieces. Now, what happens when I find pre-made blocks? Well, I press them for one. Once they are pressed, they go into the pre-made pile. So I have a pre-made pile. Here's a half a block right here. Here's a strip piece unit. I put all these together because in the future, I plan to make an ugly quilt, or what you would call kind of like a sampler, but it would be a scrappy sampler because it's going to have blocks from who knows what and where filling it. So I just wanted to share with you that every now and then I do get just regular blocks, and I always find a way to use them. Okay, so once you have all of your piles situated, it's time to organize them into the places they go. 1, fat quarters. Now, I would take you into the bin that they go, but unfortunately, I have to climb over a couple mounds of stuff to get to it because I have client jobs kind of sitting in the way. So I'm going to go put these away real quick. Give me a second. Fat quarters filed. In the proper bin they go in. Next pile. Here are my salvage to salvage cuts. This is the to be pre-cut bin. And what I mean by that is I'm going to sooner or later just chop all this up. So I just put it in here for now. And then little by little, I feel like ironing some days. I'll get all this prepped. or I feel like cutting some days and I'll sit and start making my pre-cuts. So all this right here, that is a selvage to selvage cut. These are small. These, well, actually, hold on. These ones right here. There we go. I can get a 5-inch strip out of that, and those are the smaller ones. Those go in this bin. Oops, they go that way. These two, on the other hand, these are wider, so these are almost 9 inches. There's a bin for these. Hold on. Here is that bin. So this bin is filled with, I'm going to hold these up so you can see, anything that's super wider than 5 inches. So these are all wider than 5 inches, and you can see they're neatly pressed so I can fit a lot here. So these are going to go here. I'm going to remove this so that you can see how many of these I've fit into this little bin just by pressing them all. So pressing them all, you can do this, just like that. Now that all those are in there, and I keep this just right there because it's Christmas fabric and, you know, it's separated. So the next bin is those bigger pieces that I could fold in half. So they're bigger than 10, 11, 12, 13 inches or more, but less than 18 inches because half yards go somewhere else, and 18 inches is a half a yard. These are less than a half a yard. Yep. Here is the bin for those. So this bin, if you could see, they're neatly folded in here for now. This actually has more than half yards in it temporarily because I ran out of space. But what I do is I take these and I stick them in here by what you call folding it in. It's like when you're making dough and you're folding it in. Well, that's what I do right here. So I just kind of give it a little pull and I fold it in. And these kind can just sit in shelves or, you know, on their side like this. But as you can see, they're folded in there neatly. And the more you press them to put them in these, the easier they lay. So let's go put this where it goes. So now let's move on to what I do with all this and all these bigger cuts right here. What do I do with them when they're already that size? Well, one thing I can tell you is there is a bin down there that I press and put it in, and I just haven't got to that bin, but I've been working on the newest ones because, well, they're neatly folded, so it's okay, and they're out of the way in a bin. But for video's sake, we're going to come over here and we're going to see how I managed to do all this. But I guess first I should tell you when I do all what I do, where do I put it? So from here, it starts in this pile, goes to that pile, then the small cuts and bigger cuts make their way back to the cutting table. We'll swipe all that off. Then they're going to get chopped down and put into bins like this. And don't mind my 3.5-inch squares are kind of sitting on top in a couple 4s and some 8.5s because I haven't put them away yet. But here is my 10-inch bin. Everything in this bin under these pieces is 10-inch squares. And the bin for these are actually in my bedroom because I've been hand sewing them. But moving along right here. Now don't get dizzy. Anyway, these are the cut bins. All of these. So we have 1-inch squares, and I need to get another bin for my 2-inch squares because I'm cutting those. And then I also have, let's see if we can find it, 1.5-inch bin right here. And then 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5 solid. Then I have 1.5-inch full-length strips, that's selvage to selvage. And those are mixed colors. These are solids, full-length 1.5-inch strips. This is leftover binding, which I think need to just go into something else because I have so much of it. These are 2.5-inch strips that are random lengths. They weren't from a 44 or 43 or 42-inch wide fabric. They're from like a 50-something wide fabrics. Then we have, 3.5 is in my room. 4-inch is, I think, somewhere else right now because I moved it out of the way. Oh yeah, it's over there on the other side. But I have a 4-inch bin. 4.5, and then we don't have 5, but we do have 5-inch solid squares and 5-inch full-length strips, selvage to selvage. 2.5-inch solid strips. These are poly blend ones, so these are for like when I'm trying to see if something works. This is what I use. We have fat quarter solids here, 8.5-inch squares, scraps from leftover project, and then all down there is all fat quarters, but they're different kind of fat quarters. They're like groupings of them. And if you look at my mess, way over there, there's a fat quarter drawer and a 5-inch square bin. And then right here is my 4-inch square bin because they overflowed. This is my random width of fabric bin. And under there, I pulled it out in my storage and organization video, are my 2.5-inch strips. My room's a disaster. These two bins right here are for scraps of batiks only. So all my batiks get completely separated, okay? Don't worry about those. Anyways, those folded in half ones that are a half yard or bigger, oops, wrong drawer, go in drawers like this. Again, refer to my video posted in the top corner up here of my storage and organization. This is what we're going to be making right now, these things. So let's go to the cutting mat. So there is a lot going on right now, but we're going to start with the biggest pile. So what I do is I bring the pile over to me, and what I do is I open all these pieces up that I neatly pressed, and I start with the biggest size I can get. So I line this up on lines on the cutting mat, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I could fit a 10-inch square. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not quite. It's shy, and I would have to adjust. Oh, there we go. I adjusted it just a little bit. I can get a 10-inch square out of this right here. So the first thing I do is I make sure everything's nice and flat and flush. I don't want to be off by anything. I want an exact 10-inch square. So I'm going to take my ruler, cut that there. I'm going to come over 10 inches. This is a 5-inch ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus the ruler. Lay it here. I'm going to cut right there, separate it. I'm going to cut right here, and I'm going to come down to this side and cut right, oops, get on there. There. Move all that little tiny pieces out of the way. And here I have a 10-inch square, but there's a fold, so let me iron that real quick. Once I have a 10-inch square, it goes in the 10-inch square bin. All right, what else can I get from this? Well, I knew that I can get 10 inches from here to here, but it doesn't look like, because this side started to bow, like I can get 5-inch squares. So the next size is 4-inch. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is already a straight cut. I'm going to cut 4 inches because I do have a 4-inch bin. So I'm going to go ahead, cut 4 inches. This is not going to be 4. Oh, it is. Look at that. I got close. Look at that. Just ever so slightly. Look at that. So now I can get some 4-inch squares. So we're going to go ahead and continue on by straightening this edge just ever so slightly, just like that. You can see right there, it's nice and straight. Then I go ahead and I cut 4 and 4. So this will be going in my 4-inch square bin, which is put away. So I'm going to be putting them in a pile. What do I have left? Well, it looks like I have 2 inches left exactly on the nose. So what do I do with it? I cut 2-inch squares. So let's cut 2-inch squares because this is 4 inches right there. So now I have 2-inch squares for my 2-inch square bin, which is not right here. So we're just gonna make a pile. And usually I don't have the Go Baby right here in my way or this. I just make a pile of all the sizes and then I put them away. All right, let's move on to this piece. Well, just off the start, I know that I can get 5-inch squares. So I'm gonna leave it folded in half so that I'm cutting more than one layer at a time. I'm going to straighten out one edge. I'm going to line the fold up with a line on my ruler, and I'm going to straighten one side up. Turn it around, line my 5-inch edge up, because this is a 5-inch ruler, up with the edge, make the cut. I'm going to pull that away because I can probably get almost 2.5. So we're going to do, well, I'm just going to cut it at 2 1/4, and it's going to go in my string bin. And yes, I pre-cut my strings. Weird, I know, but I'm going to show you right now why. But let's finish with the 5-inch squares. So we're going to start by trimming this edge up, just like that. Oh my goodness. Cut. And then we're going to line this up on this side now, because this side's been cut, 5 inches, and line the next side up, 5 inches. And then what do I have left here? Well, I can get 1.5-inch squares from it. So I'm going to cut it into 1.5-inch squares because guess what? I have a 1.5-inch square bin. So I'm going to get 3 of them, and then I'll have a tiny bit of waste, literally 1/2 inch. So there's 3 1.5-inch squares. And I don't actually stack these up nicely. I just throw them in the bin. So I'm just going to throw them aside. So here we have 4, not just 2, but 4 because I had it folded in half, 5-inch squares. I'm going to stack them out of the way. Let's cut another one. This is the same size piece. So we're going to go ahead and just say same strips. So we're going to line this up, straighten the edge. And I just realized that that had a little bit of an overhang. So we're going to come right here and cut it to size properly. It's best to make sure, so you can see it's hanging over right here, make sure that both sides are lined up and then cut to your smallest one. So again, we're going to do 5-inch squares. So I'm going to cut a 5-inch strip. See if there's 2.5 left. and there is not, so we're going to cut the 2 1/4, and it's going to go in my strings because I want to keep it long. Plus, I want to show you the strings bin anyway, because you guys will know what I do with those other strings that we pressed. So I'm going to line this up on a line right here. It's going to cross over ever so slightly, just like that. It's nice and straight. I'm going to cut this side off first, right here. Make a nice straight cut. I got both pieces that time. Line up the edge with the edge. Cut, pull it away, and cut. What do I have left? Definitely already know because it was the same size piece. Here's 4 5-inch squares. Those are just going to get stacked up, and this is going to be turned into 1 1/2-inch squares. So I will get 3 of them. I just line up my 1 1/2, cut, cut, and cut. I always have 1/2 inch left. That's okay to go in the garbage. And then I'm just going to take these, and they're going to go in their pile. So now that you've seen how those cuts are done, let me show you the string bin. Okay, here is the string bin. Here is the strings in the string bin. So you can see that all these strings are pressed and all these strings are cut. That's right. So they are cut to a specific size. No specific size is what I mean. Like they are specifically cut. But when I cut them, I just did whatever size I can get. So if it's not even, say, 2 1/2, because these are all less than 2 1/2, say it's 2 1/4 or 2 3/8 or 2 1/8 or 7/8 or even 2 6 millimeters. It don't matter. They're in here. So strings, this is why it's nice to have them pressed because they fit lovely. And if I reach my hand down in here and pull it up, you can see they're neatly pressed in here. So these are all my strings, everything but solid. There's no solid strings in here. So you can see it's pretty much full. It's time to make another string quilt. But now that you see where the strings go, just know that I'm going to take this pile that I just pressed for you guys in the beginning. This pile is going to be trimmed up and thrown into here. Okay, moving on. Here's another big piece. Is there 10 inches? Well, let's line it up and see how wide it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but no, it doesn't line up. So I can take and cut 8 1/2-inch squares, or I can start with 5 and just cut some 5-inch squares and move on down from there. And that's what I'm going to do. Here is a selvage right here, but this is not a selvage. What we're going to do is line up just the selvage. I'm going to fold it on top of itself up to that selvage sticking out because I'm just going to chop right there anyway. We're going to straighten out one edge, and we're just going to start with the highest number, which is 5 inches here. I probably can cut 8 1/2-inch squares, but I really don't want to add to that pile anymore. All right, so we're going to turn this and cut 5-inch strip. The next size I know for a fact I can get is 4 inches. Obviously, that's a good number, so we're going to cut it. 4-inch. Right there. That's garbage. I can care less. Here we go. We're going to straighten up this one side right here to where they're the exact same. Just like that. That's trash. We're going to go over here and cut 5-inch squares. And this is not quite 1 inch, so that's garbage. So I just got 6 5-inch squares from this. And all of my 5-inch squares go into a bin. I don't care anymore that they have the separators because I'm going to be doing something specific with them in the soon future. All right, we're going to move on to our 4-inch cuts. Again, I'm going to cut the selvage off first. I'm going to make sure I line this up. I was able to get 6 of the 5s, so obviously I'm going to get 6 of the 4s and some 2-inch left over probably. Okay, so there's 6 so far, but I do have quite a big piece left, so I'm going to cut 4 inches from it first, just like this. So there's a 4-inch square. Those are now done. So I got 7 squares out of that. I'm going to put that with the pile. And I still know this is 4 inches, so I'm going to get 2 2-inches. I'm going to cut this off. This isn't an inch, so guess what? Oh, there is an inch right there on that end. Kind of crooked, but there is an inch right there. This is going to go in my 1-inch square bin because I was able to get 1 inch, but the rest of this is not. It's close, but no cookie. You can see it angles. So there's for my 1-inch bin, which I just throw those in. And then this just gets split in half because this is 2 inches. I mean, 4 inches. So 2 and 2 is 4. So that'll go with my 2-inch square bin. So there's my waist so far. We're just going to move this up here. Let's move on to the smaller pieces. Why do I separate these smaller pieces? Well, it makes it easier to know that all these are going to be 2-inch squares, 3-inch squares, 1 1/2-inch squares, and so on and so forth. So what I do is I see that this is 2 inches just right off the bat. I can see it. It's already really straight. And since I pressed it, it stays straight. So all I need to do now is just cut this into 2-inch squares. So I'm just going to subcut it because it's really pretty darn straight to start with. So I'm going to straighten up one edge right here. I'm going to go ahead and just cut 2-inch increments. 2-inch, 4-inch. I'm not even separating them, just making sure that they're staying straight. Oops. 6-inch and 8. So I just got 4 2-inch squares, and I'm just going to get rid of this little shredding piece right there. 4 2-inch squares cut just like that, and I didn't have to subcut them to start. So I'm just going to put them over there. So I'm just going to repeat that process. This one looks 2 inches, and it looks to be pretty darn straight. So I'm going to do that same procedure. I'm going to line it up. I'm going to cut, and then I'm just going to cut the 2-inch increments. So there's 2, there's that, and then there's this. So I got 3 2-inch squares from that, but this can be 1.5. Oh, that's exactly 1.5. So we just need to cut this way 1.5. So I got 1.5-inch square out of that. That's going to go in my pile. That's going in the garbage. And here's my 2-inch squares. All right, what about these sizes? Right off the bat, it is not 5 inches, you can tell, and it is pretty close to 4. So this is going to go ahead and be turned into 4-inch strips or squares. Now I do 3.5-inch too. So here's like this piece right here. I doubt it's 3.5. Oh, it is 3.5. This is exactly 3.5. So this will get cut for my 3.5-inch bend. But let's just show you that some of these won't get 4, but this one got lucky and it has 4. So we're going to go ahead and straighten this side out and then lay this on here. That side looks to be pretty straight already, so we're just going to go for it. I got 1 and 2 4-inch squares out of this. Those are going to go in the bin. And then this, I know for a fact I can get 2 inches out of it. Or let's see. Yep, that's it. 2 inches. We're just going to go to the 2-inch mark and split it in half right here. Just like that. So here's 2 2.5-inch square, 2-inch squares. All right, we're going to move on to trying to find a different size piece to work with here. So what if I have this chunk right here? Trying to show you guys that they're in my scrap bins. There's also scraps that look like this. These scraps right here are odd shape. How do I work with those? Well, there's going to be a few in here. See? Odd shape and, oh my goodness, odd shape. So you can see there's plenty of odd shapes to work with in my scraps. So what do I do with them? Well, the same thing as everything else that I'm doing. I'm going to start by straightening out one edge. One edge is straightened. Then I'm going to go, hey, look, I can get a 5-inch square from here. So guess what I do? I cut 5 inches. I turn it. I straighten it. I make a nice straight cut right here. And I cut a 5-inch square. There's a 5-inch square. Here's a weird piece, but I know I can get 2.5 inches. So ready? 2.5-inch cut. Move that out of the way. And here's 2 2.5-inch squares because I started with a 5-inch piece. So we're going to go ahead and cut that in half. And look, 2 2.5-inch squares. Now, we have this little funky piece. I see about 1.5 inches right there. And if you don't trust it, put your ruler on it. So it has a little divot taken out of it. So I don't know if I want to use it. So the next size is 1 inch. I'm going to get 2 1 inches from here. So we're going to go 1 inch and 1 inch. That's garbage because there's not an inch there. And I'm just going to subcut this direction 1 inch and 1 inch. So here's 2 1-inch squares. The rest of that is garbage. Here we go. What's left of this? Well, 2.5 inches seems to be a good number, so we're going to go with that. So I'm going to cut 2.5 inch, and I'm going to see right here is where 2.5 stops. So right where that black little thread is, I know that there's no more room for 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to go ahead and straighten that side out first. Turn this around. Use my 2.5-inch ruler because it's easier. Lay it on here and cut. Obviously, that's garbage. I know I seem to be making a big waste mess, but there's no other way around it unless you're crumb piecing. All right, what can I get from here? I definitely can get a 1.5-inch square, so that's what I'm going to cut. I'm actually just going to cut it like this and like that. Those are garbage. That's my 1.5-inch pile. Again, here's 1.5 inch worth, so I know it stops right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that away. Turn it. I have a nice straight edge. We're going to cut 1.5 inch squares, just like this. And then I know I can get 1 inch out of here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 1 inch. Turn it, cut that extra piece off right there at that end. There's another 1 inch square. That's definitely not 1 inch, that's garbage. And I have 1 inch worth right here. So we're gonna get rid of that and that. So here's one more 1 inch square and some 1.5. I still have room for 2 more 1.5s right here. So I'm gonna get 2 more out of this piece right there. So 2 more 1.5 inch squares, they just go in that bin. Is there room for 1 inch right here? No, there's not. And can I get 1 inch from here? I can. Don't need that. Come over here. 1 inch. Nope, not enough. So that's it. That funny piece is cut up. Here's another funny piece. Right here is a 5-inch square worth, so I'm just going to do that same exact thing where I straighten up one edge, just like that. I cut my 5-inch strip first, because no matter what, I'm always going to have my leftovers towards the 2.5-inch squares. All right, I'm going to lay it here, straighten out one edge first, because I know I'm going to get one 5-inch square from here, just one. So there's one 5-inch square. Actually, almost, there's a little chunk taken out. So we're going to go with 2.5. So I'm going to get 2 right there. And we're going to go with 2.5. Well, yeah, let's do that. We're just not going to get 2 squares out of it. We're just going to get the 1. So we're going to cut the 2.5 anyway. And then work with the rest. So that's garbage. We'll get 1 right here. So there's 1 2.5. There's 2 2.5s because that was a 5-inch wide. And this has a little tiny corner, but it's more than a 1/4 inch, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut a 1.5, and then a 1. So I'm just going to turn it and get 1 inch. And I want to be fussy cutted about this because there's a little shamrock. So I'm literally going to line it up like this and keep my little shamrock right there. Oops, that's the 1-inch pile. And here is 1 inch right here. So again, I'm going to get a couple. So we're going to go ahead and cut some 1-inch squares. 1 and 1. So there's 1-inch squares from that. That's my 1.5 pile. All right, I know I can get 2.5 here. So we're just going to line up the 2.5 right there. This, we're going to measure right there. So that's 1 inch right here. We're going to straighten this up because this is 1 inch right here. So I'm going to get 2 1-inch squares out of this little piece real quick. The rest of this is not 1 inch. So there's 1 and there's 2. And that is not a 1 inch. So that just gets going out of the way. Here's my 2.5. So we're going to go ahead and cut. Ooh, don't do it, Tiffy. I need to straighten this edge out first. There we go. I almost cut that at 2 inch. 1, 2, and I won't get a 3rd. So we're going to move on to the next number down, which is 1.5. I'm going to only get 1 1.5 from this, and then 1 1 inch. So I just turn it, put it on here, cut it. So 1.5 and a 1 inch. Then this, I have about 1.5 right here. So we're going to cut 1.5, just like that. So there's 1.5, and it doesn't look to have any, nope, not enough for anything else. So that's garbage. So as you can see, I little by little make my way through all of this scrap, okay? And then I cut it all down and I get 5 inches and 4 inches and 2.5 inches and 3.5 inches and 3 inches and 1 inch. I go only to 1 inch. Then I'll pick them up after I feel like I'm done for the day. So after I feel like I'm done for the day and I don't want to stand here or sit here, because I do this while sitting as well. When I feel like I don't want to stand or sit here any longer, I just take the big scrap piles that's left and I put them in a bin and they just get stacked out of the way. So I try to keep separated the big chunks from the little chunk to make it easier, and they go into bins temporarily or into a baggie, and then I go through and pick up all the piles I made. So like I said, I will lay out on my desk a 10-inch square pile, 5-inch, 8.5, you know, I'm trying not to do 8.5 anymore because I really don't do anything with those 8.5-inch ones, but I do the main pre-cut sizes 10, 5, and 2.5 because they sell all those. Then the rest are just the oddballs in between. You never know when you need a 4-inch square. Plus I kind of just need to start sewing them all together into some scrappy quilts because, like I said, I have 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch, 2.5 inch, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. I have some 8.5. I skipped to 10, and then everything else is big enough to be a fat quarter, and or I chop it down. So those are the sizes that I pre-cut. I just take all these piles that I made. I put them, when I'm done, in their correct bins, which are super full, but I just keep filling them. And then I use them. Like my 2.5-inch squares, I did a 2.5-inch quilt block series, which at one of these top corners, it will be linked to my 25 patch block playlist for that, the series of making those. So if you want to cut your scraps down all into 2.5-inch squares, go for it because I have that playlist available to watch. And we made 90 blocks into a king size quilt, so you might like that. The rest of all this, I use them all the time. So when I have, say I buy a charm pack and I didn't like those 2 pieces. I don't like them. I just don't want them in there. So I'll pull those from the charm pack and I'll go to my 5-inch square bin and pull 2 pieces that match the charm pack in some way or another, and nobody ever knows the difference. So I utilize these 5-inch squares all the time. When I make test blocks for videos, or when I get an idea in my head, or when I just feel like sewing, all those squares, these right here, are already cut out for me. So if I wanted to make a bunch of 5-inch squares, I take those 5-inch squares and make a bunch of 4 patches, and then do disappearing 4 patch with scraps, with all scrappy colors, everything's different. I would have a very scrappy, interesting quilt. And all of my pieces are pre-cut. If you have a Go Cutter, AccuQuilt cutter with all the dies, I would say use that if you don't want to cut this many pieces. I don't know what all kind of dies they have. I do know from experience now, because I have one. I have that little baby Go. You can get the 3.5-inch squares, but I'm pretty sure they make 2.5-inch strip dies. They make 5-inch square dies. They make all sorts of stuff. And if that's the way you want to cut your fabric, go right ahead, because I hear that all those die cutting systems, the electric ones, are a little bit easier and faster to use, so you can cut multiple layers and be done with it. As you saw, I cut just the one layer at a time. There are times though when the scraps from these piles, so from these piles right here, these scraps, sometimes there's more than one piece that's the same size. So I definitely am able to stack those up on top of each other and cut them. So that is how the scraps are made into actual usable pieces. Not saying you have to cut these like this. You could just randomly cut a bunch of whatever funky pieces and you can make crumb quilts. I do have these guys right here. So these are pieces that are funky that I just had left over from the die cutter because the fabric didn't have enough and I didn't notice it when I put it in there. But I have pieces of scrap like this. These I'm not going to cut down because I already ran them through the die cutter. So these I'm going to put in my crumb bin so that I can just build scraps off of it and make crumb block. I think I have a really old tutorial that I probably should update on making crumb blocks, but I definitely do that. And there are one other thing that I do that I want to add is when I get matching stuff in the scraps from people. So here's 2 10-inch squares. You can see that. When I get matching stuff like this, sometimes I just like to make the blocks, make some blocks. So what I'll probably do is sew it on the diagonal or sew it all the way around and then cut on the diagonal twice and make some pinwheel blocks and then stick them in my orphan block pile, because I'm trying to add a little bit more variety to the orphan block pile, which also I get orphan blocks in the scrap piles as well that people send me. So my orphan block pile it's a pretty good sized drawer. It's the same one that my fat quarters and my 5-inch squares are in. It's a pretty good sized drawer, and I sometimes won't want to cut these down. I just go ahead and I make blocks out of them, and then I throw those blocks in the orphan drawer. That way when I go to make the orphan quilts, or ugly quilts is what I call them, because nothing's going to match. There's not even, yeah, it's just going to be a jumbled mess of whatever. But when I finally make those quilts, it gives more variety in the fabric, so it's even more scrappier. So just know that I do keep some of the scraps out. So if you pulled from a layer cake and made a pattern and you have 3 squares left, make a block out of that, put it in your orphan pile, and then at the end of every year, make an orphan quilt. I have yet to make the end of a year orphan quilt, but one of these days I will get to it. I don't think I had enough blocks for a whole entire quilt yet, but sooner or later I will. All right, so after I put everything away, what do I do with these cuts, these bins, and this bin right here? What I'll do is I'll take these strips. Sometimes they're already exact and they're perfect, but there are times that they're not. So what I do is I cut these down. So this looks to be like a 2.5-inch strip, but if it's not, and these sides don't line up, which this one is not, I will trim it down to 2 1/4. This one looks like a 1 1/2, but again, if the edges don't line up, I really don't want to add it to my 1 1/2-inch bin because those are pretty darn straight. But say it is, and I don't have to cut it, it goes straight to that bin. But if anything, I can cut it down to 1 3/8, which is less than a half, 1 notch less. When I start cutting all these down, I have a bin for them. I'll show you in a second. But what if there are pieces like this and this? These right here, right off the bat, there's 5 inches here. So I will take and make 5-inch full-length strips. 5-inch full-length strips actually work great for like borders. If you want to have scrappy borders, full-length strips, you just have some scrappy borders on your scrappy quilt and do that. if I can't get 5 inches, I'll just cut, 2.5-inch strips or 1.5-inch strips or 3.5-inch strips and then subcut to 3-inch squares. Now this stack, I'm just going to pull a big chunk of it off the top. These automatically get cut into 2.5-inch strips. Why? Because there's at least 10 inches here. So I can get at least 4 2.5-inch strips from all those 10-inch pieces. Those, because let's just use this one as an example because it's my favorite color. These ones, if I have multiple strips of it, so I have 4 2.5-inch strips from here, I can use that for binding on a small project. So I have 4 strips. So that's small project binding right there. So I will cut those all into 2.5-inch strips. That is how my 2.5-inch strip bin got super full. But let me grab that other bin so I can show you what I do with the random size selvage to selvage length strips. So right here, I have a random length or random width, I should say, but all full length strips selvage to selvage or, with the fabric. These, as you can see, are all random. 2.5 does not go in here. Anything under 2.5 goes into this bin because it's a random size. And this will all become something for string quilts because they're already there and they're random sizes and well, you can see how full this box is. It's almost to the top. I'll probably have to have another one or maybe make something. Maybe I should make something. You're probably going to tell me I should in the comments below anyway, so because I know I should. Anyway, that's where they go. So these random width by width of fabric, random length, no, they're just random strips by width of fabric. Random sizes under 2.5-inch go in their own bin and then 2.5-inch go in their own bin. So this right here, this whole stack will become 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to probably have to make a whole new 2.5-inch strip bin. Or maybe I should make something. Maybe I should make a bunch of jelly roll race quilts because I've done a super scrappy jelly roll race quilt. Anyway, that's what I do with everything. So every bin has a specific task thrown into it. So these would be cut into random width of fabric strips and or 2.5 or 5-inch strips. Then I have my 2.5-inch strip bin. Then I put all those strips into a random width of fabric bin or random width fabric, full length width of fabric. Then I do my 2.5 and so on and so forth inch squares, my 5-inch squares, my 10-inch squares. You get the picture. Anyways, I'm just rambling on here, trying to think of all the things that I can make sure I add to this video for you guys. So I think I pretty much covered it all. If you need any more storage and organization videos, check out my video somewhere linked on my quilt room tour and storage and organization. I kind of, open a little bit more stuff and show you. This was mainly focused on how I organize it when it comes in and people send me scraps. This is how I organize it and get it cut up so that way it's ready to use. This is what I do. And as soon as I move into a fabric room, this will be cleaned up even more and it'll make it easier for me to put it all away. Because right now I kind of got boxes stacked on everything. And it's hard to move around and show you guys everything in detail. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and I will let y'all go to have a nice, wonderful day. So bye. This is why I press. Ooh, my lordy lordy. You see all that dust? Next step, Tiffy. I'm done. Ha ha.